The massive crystal dome of the Zephyrian Institute gleamed under the three suns of Vextar Prime. Inside the grand auditorium, beings from across the galaxy filled seats that had been specially designed to accommodate different body types. Tall, thin Vorthax with their multiple arms sat next to the floating gas forms of the ethereal collective. The crystalline representatives of the hegemony caught and scattered light in rainbow patterns across the walls. Dr. Sarah. Chen adjusted her simple human chair and looked around the auditorium with quiet amazement. This was her first time attending the Galactic Archaeological Congress, and she felt very small among the hundreds of distinguished scholars. Most of them had been studying ancient civilizations since before Earth had even been discovered by the galactic community. At the front of the auditorium, Dr. Thexit stood behind the speaker's podium. His forearms moved gracefully as he prepared his presentation materials. The Vorthax scholar was famous throughout the galaxy for his work on dead civilizations. His 12 advanced degrees were displayed as glowing symbols that floated around his head like a crown. Sarah had read his papers during her graduate studies and never imagined she would see him speak in person. Honored colleagues, Dr. Thexery began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's translation system. Today I present our findings from the ruins of Kepler 442b. As you know, this dead world has puzzled our best minds for 3 standard years. The main display screen lit up with images of a barren planet. Broken structures jutted from red sand like broken teeth. The ruins looked ancient beyond measure, weathered by time and cosmic radiation. Sarah leaned forward in her seat, studying the photographs with interest. The civilization that built these structures died out approximately 50,000 years ago. Dr. Thexavi continued. Based on our analysis of their tools and building materials, they achieved roughly level 2.3 technology before their extinction. Primitive by our standards, but respectable for their time period. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Sarah frowned slightly. Something about the ruins looked wrong to her, though she could not put her finger on what it was. The architecture seemed too complex for a level 2.3 civilization. Dr. Thexery touched his control device, and new images appeared on the screen. These showed close-up photographs of carved symbols covering the walls of the ruined buildings. The symbols were intricate and beautiful, consisting of complex geometric patterns mixed with what looked like mathematical equations and star charts. These markings appear throughout the ruins, Dr. Thexabid explained. They cover nearly every surface in the main complex. For 3 years, our best computational systems have attempted to decode their meaning. Teams from 17 different species have applied their most advanced algorithms. Linguistic analysis programs have run continuously, processing trillions of possible translations. Sarah studied the symbols on the screen. They reminded her of something, though she could not immediately remember what. The patterns seemed familiar, like a half-remembered song or a face glimpsed in a crowd. The conclusion of our research is clear, Dr. Thexvey announced. These symbols are aesthetically pleasing but ultimately meaningless. They appear to be decorative elements created by a primitive culture that valued artistic expression over practical communication. We have classified them as ceremonial artwork, possibly used in religious rituals. Several scholars in the audience nodded approvingly. Dr. Velthon of the crystalline hegemony raised one of his sharp crystalline appendages. Dr. Thexever, your thorough analysis confirms what we have long suspected about primitive civilizations. They often mistake random markings for profound meaning. It is a common trait among underdeveloped minds. Laughter echoed through the auditorium. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, though she was not sure why. The comment had not been directed at her specifically, but something about the tone made her uncomfortable. Dr. Thexfee displayed more images of the symbols. Indeed, Dr. Velthon, we must be careful not to project our own intelligence onto these ancient markings. Just because they appear complex does not mean they contain any actual information. Complexity and meaning are not the same thing. More murmurs of agreement. Sarah found herself staring at the symbols more intently. The familiar feeling grew stronger. Somewhere in her memory, she had seen patterns like these before. Not exactly the same, but similar in structure and rhythm. Our recommendation, Dr. Thexberry continued, is to classify these symbols as Category 7th, primitive decorative elements. This will allow us to redirect our resources toward more promising archaeological sites. The Andorian tomb complex, for example, shows clear evidence of actual written language. The presentation continued for another 20 minutes. Dr. Thexud showed detailed scans of the symbols, chemical analysis of the materials used to create them, and computer models of how they might have been carved. Every piece of evidence supported his conclusion that the markings were meaningless decoration. Sarah barely heard the technical details. Her mind was working on the puzzle of why the symbols looked so familiar. She thought about her childhood, her education, her travels on Earth before joining the galactic community. Where had she seen patterns like these? Are there any questions? Dr. Thexavit asked as his presentation ended. Several hands went up around the auditorium. A Zephyrian scholar asked about the dating methods used. An ethereal representative inquired about atmospheric conditions that might have affected the carvings. Dr. Thexori answered each question with professional expertise and obvious pride in his thorough research. Sarah raised her hand hesitantly. She felt nervous about speaking in front of so many distinguished scholars, but the familiar feeling about the symbols was growing stronger. She needed to take a closer look. Dr. Thexavi noticed her raised hand and paused. Yes, the human representative has a question? All eyes in the auditorium turned toward Sarah. She felt hundreds of alien gazes focusing on her small human form. Some of the expressions seemed curious, others amused, and a few appeared slightly condescending. Dr. Thexvi, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Would it be possible for me to examine the symbols more closely? I would like to study the patterns in more detail. A ripple of quiet amusement passed through the audience. Sarah could see scholars exchanging glances and subtle gestures that clearly communicated their expectations. They were prepared to watch a young human embarrass herself with naive enthusiasm. Dr. Velthon made a sound that the translation system interpreted as laughter. How refreshing, he said in a tone that was anything but sincere. A fresh perspective from our newest galactic members. Perhaps human eyes will see something that our advanced analytical systems missed. More laughter. Sarah felt her face burning again, but she kept her hand raised. Dr. Thexavi looked at her for a long moment, his four eyes blinking in sequence. Then he made a gesture that seemed to indicate generous tolerance. Of course, he said. By all means, let us see what human intuition can accomplish where scientific method has failed. The main display screen flickered and changed, showing a high-resolution image of the symbol carvings. Every line and curve was perfectly clear, captured in stunning detail by the Institute's advanced imaging systems. The patterns filled the entire wall-size screen, complex and beautiful and mysterious. Sarah stood up slowly and walked toward the front of the auditorium. Every step seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Behind her, she could feel the weight of hundreds of expectant gazes. Some scholars had already pulled out recording devices, apparently expecting to document her failure for posterity. She stopped in front of the massive display screen and looked up at the symbols. This close, the familiar feeling was overwhelming. She knew these patterns. She had seen them before many times. But where? Sarah stood in front of the massive display screen, studying the ancient symbols while hundreds of alien scholars watched her with barely concealed amusement. The silence in the auditorium was thick with expectation. She could feel their patience, wearing thin as she traced the patterns with her eyes, searching for the connection that hovered just beyond her conscious memory. Dr. Thexavidi cleared his throat pointedly. Dr. Chen, please take your time. We are all eager to benefit from human insight into these decorative markings. His tone was polite, but Sarah could hear the subtle mockery underneath. Several scholars chuckled quietly. Dr. Velthon leaned over to whisper something to his neighbor, a gesture that caused his crystalline body to chime like wind bells. The sound seemed to trigger more suppressed laughter throughout the auditorium. Sarah ignored the growing amusement behind her and focused on the symbols. The patterns were incredibly complex, but they followed rules. She could see mathematical relationships between different elements, recurring motifs that appeared with specific frequencies. The arrangement was not random at all, despite what the galactic experts had concluded. Perhaps, suggested a voice from the audience, our human colleague would benefit from understanding our methodology. We have applied 17 different cryptographic systems to these markings. Quantum linguistic processors have analyzed every possible symbolic relationship. The patterns you see are simply the result of artistic expression, not communication. Sarah recognized the speaker as Dr. Zeffel, a renowned linguist from the academic worlds. His credentials were impressive even by galactic standards. He had successfully decoded 43 ancient languages during his career, including several that had been considered impossible to translate. Dr. Zeffel raises an excellent point, Dr. Thexwoyd added. Human pattern recognition abilities are well documented, but we must not mistake pattern detection for meaning detection. Many primitive species see faces in clouds or hear voices in wind. The tendency to find meaning where none exists is a common evolutionary trait. The laughter was becoming more open now. Sarah heard someone make a comment about biological computers trying to understand real science. Another voice mentioned something about humans being charmingly optimistic about their analytical abilities. But Sarah was no longer paying attention to the mockery. The memory she had been searching for suddenly clicked into place. She knew where she had seen these patterns before. The realization hit her like a physical blow, so obvious and simple that she almost laughed out loud. The symbols reminded her of her grandmother's quilts. It seemed absurd even to her. How could ancient alien markings remind her of something as mundane as Earth textile patterns? But the more she looked, the more certain she became. Her grandmother had been a master quilter, famous in their small town for creating incredibly complex designs that looked chaotic but followed precise mathematical rules. Amish quilting patterns, Sarah whispered to herself. Excuse me? Dr. Thexwoyd asked. Did you say something, Dr. Chen? Sarah turned away from the display screen to face the auditorium full of expectant faces. She felt suddenly calm, as if a puzzle that had been bothering her for years had finally been solved. The familiar feeling was gone, replaced by certainty. These are not decorative markings, she said clearly. They are instructions. The laughter stopped abruptly. Several hundred alien faces stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to open disbelief. Dr. Thexwoyd's forearms tensed in what Sarah had learned was a Vorthak gesture of surprise. Instructions? Dr. Velthon asked, his crystalline form shimmering with what might have been agitation. Instructions for what exactly? We have found no evidence of complex technology in these ruins. The civilization that created these markings barely achieved spaceflight. Sarah looked back at the symbols on the screen. Now that she understood what she was looking at, the pattern seemed almost blindingly obvious. How had an entire galaxy of brilliant minds missed something so clear? They achieved much more than spaceflight, she said. These symbols describe stellar engineering projects, gravity manipulation on a massive scale. The mathematical relationships encode stellar coordinates and harmonic frequencies. The geometric patterns are not decorative. They are structural diagrams. The auditorium erupted in a buzz of confused voices. Translation systems worked overtime as dozens of different species expressed disbelief in their native languages. Dr. Thexwoyd raised all four arms for silence. Dr. Chen, he said with exaggerated patience, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you are making extraordinary claims. Our analysis has been thorough and scientific. These markings show no evidence of technological sophistication. Your analysis was looking for the wrong thing, Sarah replied. You were searching for traditional language patterns, but this is not language in the conventional sense. It is a pattern language, similar to mathematical notation but based on visual and spatial relationships instead of linear symbols. Dr. Zeffel stood up in his section of the auditorium. Dr. Chen, with respect, pattern languages are theoretical constructs. No known civilization has ever developed such a communication system. The computational requirements alone would be beyond most species. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the auditorium. Humans developed pattern languages independently on Earth. We call them folk art traditions, but they serve the same function. Quilting patterns, carpet weaving designs, architectural motifs. They encode complex information in visual forms that can be transmitted across generations without written language. The mockery was returning to some faces in the audience. A scholar from the technical consortium made a dismissive gesture. Dr. Chen, surely you are not suggesting that primitive human textile patterns are comparable to alien symbolic systems? I'm suggesting, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger, that you have been looking at these symbols through the wrong lens. You see them as attempts at conventional writing because that is what your species developed. But what if this civilization evolved a completely different approach to information storage? Dr. Thexvi was beginning to look genuinely annoyed. Dr. Chen, even if we accept your theory about pattern languages, how could you possibly decode symbols that our best systems cannot translate? You have been looking at them for less than 5 minutes. Sarah turned back to the display screen. The symbols were so clear to her now that she wondered how she had ever found them confusing. The mathematical relationships were elegant and precise. The stellar coordinates were obvious once you recognized the reference system. The warnings and instructions were written in a visual language as sophisticated as any she had ever seen. The coordinates point to a location approximately 47 light-years from here, she said. The gravity manipulation field extends 4.7 light-years in radius from the central engineering complex. Ships approaching the facility must maintain specific harmonic frequencies to avoid what they call dimensional cascade failure. The auditorium fell completely silent. Even the most skeptical scholars stopped their side conversations and stared at Sarah with sudden attention. Dr. Thexvi's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. That is impossible, he said flatly. You cannot have decoded coordinates from those markings. Our quantum computers have analyzed every possible mathematical relationship. Sarah pointed to a section of symbols near the top of the display. The coordinate system is based on stellar positions as observed from this planet 50,000 years ago. The reference stars are the same ones visible from Earth, which suggests this civilization had contact with or knowledge of our solar system. The mathematical relationships use base 12 notation, which your systems probably dismissed as decorative spacing. More silence. Sarah could see doubt beginning to creep into some of the faces watching her. Dr. Velthon was shimming with what she now recognized as deep confusion rather than amusement. Even if your interpretation is correct, Dr. Zeffel said slowly, the technology you describe is beyond anything our current civilization possesses. Stellar engineering, gravity manipulation, dimensional physics, these are theoretical concepts at best. Sarah nodded. Which is exactly why your analysis systems could not recognize them. You were looking for technology at or below your current level. But these symbols describe engineering projects that make our most advanced civilizations look primitive. The implications were beginning to sink in across the auditorium. If Sarah was right, they had been studying the remains of a civilization far more advanced than anything in the current galaxy. The primitive decorative elements were actually technical manuals left by beings who could move stars and manipulate the fabric of space itself. The silence in the auditorium stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Sarah could feel the weight of hundreds of stares as the implications of her words sank in. She had just claimed that symbols dismissed as primitive art were actually technical manuals from a civilization capable of moving stars. Even to her own ears it sounded impossible. Dr. Thexuer was the first to break the silence. His forearms moved in agitated patterns as he struggled to process what he had heard. Dr. Chen, he said, his voice carefully controlled, you are making claims that challenge 3 years of intensive research by the galaxy's most brilliant minds. Surely you understand the extraordinary nature of what you are suggesting? Sarah nodded. I understand how it sounds. But look at the symbols again. Really look at them, not as failed language but as engineering diagrams. She turned back to the massive display screen and pointed to a cluster of geometric patterns in the upper left corner. This section describes the construction of what they call a stellar anchor. The mathematical relationships define gravitational field equations that our current physics can barely theorize about. The geometric patterns show the physical structure needed to implement those equations. Dr. Velthon's crystalline form shifted colors from pale blue to deep amber, a sign of significant emotional disturbance in his species. Dr. Chen, even if we accept your interpretation method, how can you be certain about the specific meanings you are assigning? Translation requires verification, not intuition. You want verification? Sarah asked. She moved to a different section of the display and traced a complex spiral pattern with her finger. This describes the location of their main engineering facility. According to the coordinates given here, it should be in the Kepler 186 system, approximately 47 light-years from this location. The facility consists of artificial structures built around the system's primary star. A murmur ran through the audience. Dr. Zeffel stood up again, his expression troubled. Dr. Chen, we have detailed surveys of the Kepler 186 system. It contains only natural stellar phenomena. There are no artificial structures. Sarah smiled grimly. How carefully did you look? According to these symbols, the engineering structures are designed to appear natural to primitive scanning technology. They mimic stellar formation patterns and cosmic dust distributions. Only specific scanning frequencies would reveal their artificial nature. Dr. Thexer activated his personal communication device with sharp, jerky movements. Dr. Chen, this is a serious claim. If verified, it would revolutionize our understanding of galactic history. Are you willing to stake your professional reputation on this translation? I am, Sarah replied without hesitation. More than that, I can give you specific scanning frequencies to use. The symbols include technical specifications for detection equipment. The auditorium erupted in a chaos of voices. Scholars shouted questions and challenges in dozens of different languages. Translation systems struggled to keep up with the overlapping conversations. Some faces showed excitement at the possibility of a discovery that would rewrite history. Others displayed skepticism bordering on hostility. Dr. Thexvidi raised all four arms and called for order. It took several minutes for the noise to die down. When quiet finally returned, his voice was tight with barely controlled frustration. Dr. Chen, you have made specific, testable claims. We will verify them immediately. Dr. Relton, please contact the Kepler 186 research station and request deep scanning of the primary star using the frequencies Dr. Chen provides. A tall, spindly being near the back of the auditorium activated his communication equipment. Sarah provided the technical specifications she had read from the symbols, numbers and equations that felt strange coming from her mouth. She was an archaeologist, not a stellar engineer, but the patterns made the information as clear as if it were written in her native language. While they waited for the scanning results, Dr. Velthon approached the display screen. His crystalline body cast rainbow reflections across the symbols as he studied them with new attention. Dr. Chen, assuming your interpretation is correct, what exactly are we looking at? What was this civilization trying to accomplish? Sarah moved to a section of symbols she had not yet discussed. The patterns here were even more complex, involving mathematical relationships that made her head spin just looking at them. But the overall meaning was clear enough. They were building something called a cosmic resonance web, she said. From what I can understand, it was a network of artificial structures designed to allow instantaneous communication and travel across galactic distances. The engineering projects described in these symbols were construction phases of a galaxy-spanning transportation system. Dr. Zeffel made a sound that his translation device interpreted as a gasp. That would require manipulation of space-time itself. The energy requirements alone would demand the output of entire star systems. Which is exactly what they were doing, Sarah replied. These symbols describe the process of converting stars into power sources for their construction projects. They were not just moving stars, they were farming them. The implications hit the assembled scholars like a series of hammer blows. If Sarah's translation was accurate, they were looking at evidence of a civilization that had achieved what current galactic society considered impossible. The technology described in the symbols was so far beyond anything they possessed that it might as well have been magic. Dr. Relton's communication device chimed with an incoming message. The tall scholar listened for a moment, then looked up at the auditorium with an expression of shock. The initial deep scans of Kepler 186 are complete. We are detecting massive artificial structures throughout the system. They are hidden within what we previously identified as natural stellar phenomena. The auditorium fell silent again. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and terror. She had been right about the symbols, but the reality of what that meant was overwhelming. They were looking at the remains of a civilization that could manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe. Dr. Thexavi stared at the display screen with all four eyes, his earlier skepticism replaced by something approaching awe. Dr. Chen, if these symbols describe actual engineering projects, then what happened to the civilization that created them? Why did they abandon technology that advanced? Sarah studied the final sections of the symbol display, patterns that were even more complex than the engineering diagrams. The mathematical relationships here were subtle and strange, describing concepts that human physics barely had words for. According to this final section, they did not abandon their technology, she said slowly. They completed their project. The cosmic resonance web was finished approximately 48,000 years ago. But the process of building it changed them in ways they had not anticipated. She pointed to a series of interconnected spirals that seemed to shift and move when viewed directly. They became something beyond physical existence. The symbols suggest they transcended normal spacetime and moved to what they call higher dimensional frameworks. They left these instructions as a guide for younger civilizations to follow the same path. Dr. Velthon's crystalline form was now cycling rapidly through different colors, a sign of extreme emotional disturbance. You are suggesting that this civilization achieved some form of technological godhood? I am suggesting, Sarah said, that they evolved beyond our current understanding of existence itself. But they left behind a roadmap for other species to follow when they become ready. More communication devices were chiming throughout the auditorium as word of the discovery spread across the galaxy. News networks were already picking up the story. Headlines were being written about the human archaeologist who had solved a mystery that had stumped the galaxy's best minds for years. But Sarah was no longer paying attention to the chaos around her. She was studying the symbols with new understanding, seeing layers of meaning that she had not noticed before. The ancient civilization had not just built advanced technology, they had fundamentally altered the nature of reality itself, and they had left instructions for others to follow. Dr. Thexavi approached her with an expression that mixed respect with lingering disbelief. Dr. Chen, how were you able to decode these symbols when our most advanced systems failed? What did you see that we missed? Sarah turned away from the display to face him. You were looking for complexity where simplicity existed, and simplicity where complexity existed. These symbols work like the quilting patterns my grandmother used to make. They look chaotic and decorative on the surface, but they follow precise mathematical rules that create structural integrity. She gestured toward the display screen. Your analysis systems were searching for conventional language patterns because that is how your civilizations developed communication. But this species evolved a completely different approach. They encoded information in spatial relationships and mathematical harmonies instead of linear symbols. Dr. Thexavi was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Finally, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen, would you be willing to lead an expedition to the Kepler 186 system? It appears we have much to learn about these ancient engineers. Sarah looked at the symbols one more time. Seeing infinite layers of meaning stretching beyond her current understood 6 months had passed since the day Sarah Chen decoded the ancient symbols in front of a shocked galactic audience. The story had spread across the galaxy like wildfire, appearing on news networks in hundreds of languages, and spawning countless academic papers, philosophical debates, and wild conspiracy theories. Sarah had gone from being an unknown human archaeologist to the most famous scientist in the galactic community. The expedition ship Deep Inquiry dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 186 system, its sensors immediately beginning detailed scans of the region that had been hiding impossible secrets for 50,000 years. Sarah stood on the observation deck, watching the primary star grow larger on the display screens, knowing that what appeared to be a normal stellar system was actually something beyond imagination. Behind her, the expedition team prepared their equipment with nervous excitement. Dr. Thexier moved between workstations with his forearms coordinating multiple tasks simultaneously. The Vorthak scholar had insisted on joining the expedition, despite the professional embarrassment of having dismissed the symbols as meaningless. His scientific curiosity had proven stronger than his wounded pride. Dr. Velthon hung suspended in his specially designed crystalline habitat, his form shifting through subtle color changes that indicated deep concentration. Even Dr. Zeffel had requested to join the mission, bringing with him the galaxy's most advanced linguistic analysis equipment in hopes of understanding more symbol languages they might discover. The team also included representatives from a dozen other species, each bringing their own expertise and technology, but Sarah knew that most of them were here to watch her work, to see if the human who had solved an impossible puzzle could do it again. The pressure was enormous, but she tried to focus on the excitement of discovery rather than the weight of expectations. Captain Mordek, a veteran spacer from the Asteroid Mining Consortium, approached Sarah with a concerned expression on his weathered face. Dr. Chen, our long-range sensors are picking up massive artificial structures throughout the system. just as your translation predicted. But some of the readings are unusual. We are detecting energy signatures that do not match any known technology. Sarah nodded. She had expected this based on her analysis of the symbols back at the Institute. The ancient civilization's technology operates on principles our current science barely understands. What kind of energy signatures are you seeing? Captain Mordek gestured toward his sensor technician, a multi-tentacled being whose species excelled at pattern recognition in electromagnetic spectra. Show her the readings, Kexlar. The sensor display lit up with a three-dimensional map of the star system. What had appeared to be normal planets and asteroid fields were revealed as artificial constructs of staggering complexity. Rings of exotic matter surrounded the primary star, pulsing with energy patterns that seemed to bend space itself. Massive structures drifted in precise formations between the planets, connected by streams of force that made the display look like a vast web. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases, Kexler reported, his tentacles dancing across the control interfaces. They appear to be manipulating fundamental forces we can measure but not replicate. Gravity, electromagnetic fields, and something else that our instruments cannot properly identify. Sarah studied the display with growing awe. The symbols had prepared her intellectually for what they would find, but seeing the actual structures was overwhelming. The ancient civilization had turned an entire star system into a single massive machine, operating on principles that current galactic science could barely detect, much less understand. Dr. Thexavy approached the sensor display with all four eyes focused intently on the readings. Dr. Chen, your translation mentioned that this was a construction site for something called a cosmic resonance web. Are these structures part of that project? I believe so, Sarah replied. But according to the symbols, this is just one node in a network that spans the entire galaxy. If the ancient civilization completed their project as the symbols suggest, there should be hundreds of similar installations throughout known space. The implications sent a chill through the expedition team. They were looking at evidence that their galaxy had been fundamentally altered by a civilization that achieved godlike technology 50,000 years ago. Every star system they knew might contain hidden structures operating beyond their ability to detect or understand. Dr. Velthon's crystalline form brightened with sudden realization. Dr. Chen, if this network still exists and operates as designed, it might explain several astronomical anomalies that have puzzled our scientists for centuries. Gravitational variations, unexplained energy readings, quantum fluctuations that seem to follow patterns rather than random distribution. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. You are right. We have been living inside their machine for our entire evolutionary history, never realizing that what we thought was natural cosmic background was actually artificial technology. Captain Mordek cleared his throat nervously. Dr. Chen, with respect, if this ancient network is still operational, should we be concerned about activating it accidentally? Our presence here might trigger responses we cannot control. Before Sarah could answer, the ship's communication system activated with an urgent message from their support fleet, stationed at the system's edge. Commander Zelthus, the mission's military coordinator, appeared on the screen with an expression of barely controlled panic. Deep inquiry. We are detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system. Multiple structures are activating in response to your presence. We strongly recommend immediate withdrawal to a safe distance. Through the observation deck windows, Sarah could see lights beginning to pulse within the artificial structures surrounding the star. The exotic matter rings were spinning faster, creating ripples in space that her human eyes could somehow perceive, even though they should have been invisible. The ancient machine was waking up after 50,000 years of dormancy. Dr. Thexavy activated the ship's emergency communication system. Commander Zelthus, we are receiving no hostile indicators. The energy patterns appear to be scanning procedures rather than weapon systems charging. How can you be certain? Commander Zelthus demanded. We are dealing with technology that could manipulate entire star systems. If we have triggered some kind of automated defense system, our entire expedition could be destroyed in seconds. Sarah moved to the communication console. Commander, I need to examine the structures up close. The symbols contained warnings about proper approach procedures, but I need to see the actual installations to understand how to follow them correctly. The military commander's expression shifted to one of disbelief. Dr. Chen, You are suggesting we move closer to structures that are currently activating in response to our presence? That seems extremely unwise. The alternative is leaving without learning anything, Sarah replied. We came here to understand what the ancient civilization built. We cannot do that from a safe distance. Captain Mordek studied his navigation displays. Dr. Chen, if we proceed, we will be committing to whatever happens next. Our hyperspace drives will not function within the gravitational fields those structures are generating. Once we move closer, we will not be able to retreat quickly. Sarah looked around at the expedition team. She could see fear in their faces, but also excitement and curiosity. They were scientists and explorers, driven by the same hunger for knowledge that had brought them across the galaxy to investigate impossible ruins. The symbols contained specific instructions for approaching these installations safely, she said. According to the ancient warnings, the structures will only respond positively to visitors who demonstrate understanding of their technology. We need to show them that we can read their symbol language. Dr. Zeffel stepped forward. Dr. Chen, how exactly do we communicate with automated systems that operate on principles we do not understand? Sarah turned back to the observation windows, watching the lights pulse in complex patterns throughout the artificial structures. The rhythm was familiar, following mathematical relationships she had seen in the original symbols. They are already trying to communicate with us, she said. Those light patterns are not random. They are following the same visual language, structure as the symbols on Kepler 442b. The ancient civilization designed their technology to teach visitors how to use it properly. She moved to the ship's communication system. Captain Mordek, can we generate light patterns that match what we are seeing from the structures? If I can reproduce the correct symbol sequences, we might be able to signal our peaceful intentions. The captain consulted with his technical team. After several minutes of hurried preparation, they reported ready to attempt communication using the ship's external lighting systems. Sarah studied the pulsing patterns from the ancient structures, recognizing mathematical relationships and symbol sequences that matched her earlier translations. Slowly, carefully, she began to direct the ship's lights in response, spelling out messages in the visual language of a civilization that had transcended physical existence 50,000 years ago. The resending. Yes. The ancient structures throughout the Kepler 186 system pulsed with welcoming light as the deep inquiry moved deeper into the stellar engineering complex. Sarah stood at the observation deck windows, watching patterns of energy dance between artificial constructs that defied every law of physics she had learned. The star itself seemed different now, its light taking on new qualities as the exotic matter rings around it spun with increasing speed. Dr. Chen, Captain Mordek called from the navigation station. We are receiving what appears to be guidance signals from the central complex. The ancient systems are directing us toward a docking facility. Sarah turned to see the captain's display showing a three-dimensional map of their route through the artificial structures. A pathway of pulsing lights led toward a massive construct that had been hidden within what their initial scans had identified as a natural asteroid cluster. As they approached, the asteroids began to move apart, revealing something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. The central facility was enormous beyond comprehension, a crystalline structure that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could properly perceive. Its surface was covered with the same symbol languages Sarah had decoded on Kepler 442b. But these symbols were alive, shifting and changing as they watched. The ancient writing was updating itself, apparently modifying its messages based on the knowledge level of its current visitors. Dr. Thexavid moved to stand beside Sarah, his forearms trembling slightly with excitement and fear. Dr. Chen, those symbols are different from the ones we studied at the Institute. They appear to be teaching us. Sarah nodded, watching the patterns flow across the facility's surface like liquid light. The civilization that built this understood that knowledge must be transmitted gradually. They designed their systems to provide information at the rate visitors can absorb it safely. Dr. Velthon's crystalline form was cycling through colors rapidly, indicating extreme emotional activation. Dr. Chen, our sensors are detecting that the facility is generating gravitational fields that should not be possible. It is somehow manipulating space-time itself to create stable orbits around structures that have no physical mass. The docking procedure was unlike anything in their experience. Instead of mechanical clamps and airlocks, The deep inquiry was gently held in place by fields of force that seemed to understand exactly what they needed. Atmospheric readings showed that breathable air was being generated around their ship, allowing the expedition team to explore without environmental suits. Sarah was the first to step onto the ancient facility, followed closely by Dr. Thexavri and the rest of the science team. The surface beneath their feet felt solid but somehow alive, responding to their presence with gentle pulses of warmth and light. Symbols appeared in the air around them, translucent and beautiful, providing information about the structures they were approaching. "It is remarkable," Dr. Zeffel said, his voice filled with wonder. "The facility is teaching us its own language in real time. I can feel the meaning of these symbols appearing directly in my mind." Sarah studied the floating symbols with growing understanding. The ancient civilization had not just built advanced technology. They had created systems that could directly interface with biological consciousness. The facility was not just showing them information. It was downloading knowledge into their minds at a rate they could safely process. They moved deeper into the complex, following pathways that seemed to reshape themselves to accommodate their needs. The architecture was impossible by conventional standards, with rooms that were larger inside than outside, and corridors that led to destinations before they had been built. But somehow it all felt natural, as if the laws of physics were suggestions rather than absolutes within the ancient facility. In the central chamber, they found what Sarah had been hoping to discover, a massive control interface covered with the same symbol languages that had started their journey. But these symbols were three-dimensional, extending into space in configurations that human eyes could perceive, but human science could not explain. "This is the main control system for the cosmic resonance web," Sarah said, reading the information that was flowing into her consciousness from the facility itself. "According to what I am receiving, this network connects thousands of star systems across the galaxy. It allows for instantaneous communication and transportation across distances that would normally require thousands of years to traverse." Dr. Thexaviti approached the control interface cautiously. "Dr. Chen, if this network is operational, it would revolutionize galactic civilization. Travel times between worlds could be reduced from years to minutes. The implications for trade, exploration, and cultural exchange would be staggering." Sarah placed her hand on one of the symbol clusters and felt information flowing into her mind like water into a sponge. The knowledge was vast and complex, but somehow organized in ways that made it comprehensible to her human consciousness. She began to understand not just what the ancient civilization had built, but why they had built it. "The network was designed as a gift," she said, her voice filled with awe. "The ancient civilization achieved technological transcendence 50,000 years ago, but they did not want to leave younger species behind. They built this system as a bridge that other civilizations could use to follow the same evolutionary path." The implications hit the expedition team like a wave of revelation. They were not just looking at advanced technology. They were looking at a cosmic inheritance left by beings who had evolved beyond physical existence. The cosmic resonance web was an invitation to join them in whatever realm they now inhabited. Dr. Velthon's crystalline form was now blazing with brilliant white light. "Dr. Chen, are you suggesting that this network can actually transport consciousness itself? That it offers a path to the same transcendence the ancient civilization achieved?" Sarah continued to receive information from the control interface, her understanding growing with each passing moment. "The network operates on multiple levels. It can transport matter and energy across galactic distances instantly, but it can also facilitate the evolution of consciousness itself. Species that master its use eventually transcend the need for physical existence entirely." Captain Mordek approached them with a concerned expression. "Dr. Chen, with respect, this sounds extremely dangerous. We are talking about technology that could fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. Should we be activating systems we do not fully understand?" Sarah removed her hand from the control interface and turned to face the expedition team. The knowledge she had received was still flowing through her mind, revealing layers of meaning that would take years to fully process. But one thing was clear. The choice of how to use this discovery belonged to all galactic civilization, not just to her. "The ancient civilization was very careful about this," she said. "The network only activates its full capabilities when a species demonstrates that it is ready for the responsibility. It requires not just technological advancement but wisdom and spiritual maturity. The symbols serve as tests, ensuring that only civilizations that have developed beyond primitive selfishness can access the deeper functions. Dr. Thexari was studying the three-dimensional symbols with fascination. Dr. Chen, how do we determine if our current galactic civilization is ready for such responsibility? The implications of this technology could either unite all species in peaceful cooperation or destroy everything in conflicts over control. Sarah looked around at the faces of her expedition team, seeing representatives of dozens of different species who had worked together to make this discovery possible. Despite their initial skepticism and mockery, they had put aside their prejudices to pursue knowledge together. Perhaps that was the beginning of the wisdom the ancient civilization had been testing for. I think, she said slowly, that the answer to that question will determine our future as a galactic community. The network is here waiting for us to prove we deserve it, but the symbols make it clear that the choice must be made collectively, by all species working together, rather than any single civilization acting alone. She gestured toward the control interface, where new symbols were beginning to appear. The facility is offering to teach us more, but only if we can demonstrate that we will use the knowledge for the benefit of all conscious beings, rather than for dominance or destruction. The expedition team stood in silence for a long moment, contemplating the magnitude of what they had discovered. They had come seeking archaeological knowledge and found instead the key to evolutionary transcendence. The ancient symbols that had been dismissed as meaningless decoration were actually the most important discovery in galactic history. Sarah returned to the control interface and placed both hands on the symbol clusters. Information flowed into her mind again, but this time it was different. The ancient facility was showing her not just technical specifications, but visions of what galactic civilization could become if it chose the path of wisdom over the path of power. In those visions, she saw species working together across impossible distances, sharing knowledge and consciousness through the cosmic resonance web. She saw the gradual evolution of entire civilizations beyond the need for physical bodies.